This is the Great Discus. And why is it called the Great Discus? Because it's great. But why is it great, do you say? Well, it's a 3.5-inch drone that I designed like a Swiss Army knife of all drones. It has tons of mounting options. 20 by 20, 25.5 whoop board, or a 30.5 by 30.5. Has all your electronics covered. It also has extra mount for 20 by 20 if you use the inside of these 4 triangular holes on the top plate. It has the ability to be built as a top-mounted battery freestyler that can take the battery in regular formation or toilet tanked. It can take nano cameras on this side and be built slammed in a 15mm standoff formation, or you can stick bigger cameras on this side and put in larger standoffs. It's the ability to be toilet tanked underneath, or once again in regular formation. Ever since getting into FPV about 2 years ago, I've been obsessed, especially with the sub 250 category. I'm in Toronto. There's not very many places that you can go fly. The FPV experience isn't one that I get to go and enjoy like most pilots flying 5 inches. So I became obsessed with finding the perfect sub 250 drone. And I found that most of the drones out there are missing something. Or like they're designed to do one thing. I bought a ton of different sub 250 drones and basically broke them all. It actually started off with me buying 3 bind and flies over the winter. Something called the Atom RC, the Tadpole from Armaton, and a Petrel from ELRS. And I very quickly just kind of broke everything and found I wasn't really happy with any of those drones. So I started hunting through YouTube to find the perfect sub 250 drone. And around that time, Tommy, oh my God, was making his sub 250 drone, and I was really excited about that. But right from the beginning, with my first 3 sub 250 drones, I broke the right arm on like all of them. It seems to be a thing. Was that, yeah, see? This was the Armaton space grade Tadpole. There's the right arm and it's broken. This is the Crux 35. I broke both arms on this one. That's the base plate. Oh my goodness. I got it. The Atom RC, well, it started breaking. And then later, my favorite drone, the Patch Ray, kept breaking those too. So I have a whole ton of broken drones. One of the first things I guess I learned was that when you buy all these different drones, you don't get used to how they feel. When you don't get used to a feel and you're not flying it all the time, you're not gonna ever really get that connection the same. If you look at any really good FPV pilot, they're always flying the same frame. They get used to the weight, they get used to how it flies, they find that perfect configuration for them, and then they love flying that and they become one with the drone. So if you want to get to the point where you can become one with your drone, you have to have a frame that you love. With each of these drones that I broke, they all used different motors. And because they used different motors, I couldn't really kind of just like put them together. Some were bigger motors, some were smaller motors. And that was the biggest thing that kind of turned me off of Umagod's build. I think it's great and it looks like a really fun drone, but the way that he designed it was so that it would take his specific motors, so it wouldn't really take the other motors. And also by stretching it to 5 inches, it makes it larger, so it's harder to kind of like take everywhere as easily. I think it could scare more people, and it was kind of like, if you're gonna get into that, you'd have to buy a pile of those drones that are like that size and those motors and kind of be stuck in that configuration. This is what I think is one of the big problems in FPV, that lots of the drones just do one thing. So it's designed to be set up one way. So I wanted to make this in a way that it could be set up for racing, for freestyle, It can be toilet tanks. So you can try different things. You can put guards. We're gonna put guards underneath it and make it a pusher Cinewhoop type build. And just be able to stick any electronics too, because there's been other times where I have a 20 by 20 board and then I have a frame that can't take that 20 by 20 board because it only takes whoops, or I'll have a whoop and it can only take 20 by 20. So I really wanted to make something that could take anything, also strong, but not too heavy. There's that too, there's that battle. Do you want to build a drone that is thicker, which makes it stronger, but at the same time it also makes it heavier, which gives it more momentum, so when it hits, there's possibly a larger chance of you breaking it because of all that weight, bam. Or, you know, lighter, now maybe it doesn't hit as hard, and because it's lighter, the motors can really move it. So you can get this frame with 3mm base plate, 3.5mm, or 4mm. And then the top plate in 2mm or 2.5mm. You can also get it with the holes countersunk, so that you can have screws that will fit in nice and flush, or you can get it regular, you can get it chamfered, you can do whatever you want to it. I wanted you to have a lot of options. So far I've already built it up 2 times. I built a light build. My light build with no batteries weighs 91 grams. This is with a 3mm base plate, 1404 motors, an all-in-one, and you're good to go with a 15mm standoff. I'm gonna get more into the design in just a bit, but I just wanted to show you so this is the light build. Then this is the heavier build. This is with 4mm arms, with 1504.5 motors, and with a 3mm base plate, which I think is too much, so I would be doing this in the 2.5, 123 grams. And this is also carrying like a big stack in there. So it's not an all-in-one board. There are certain things that it doesn't do as well, and that's kind of how it is with anything that does everything. You can do something that does one thing very well, or you can do something that kind of does everything, and it has its strong points and it has its weak points. When built like this, in a lighter formation, everything is perfect. The motors fit on great, and the motor wires follow the drone, and everything is perfect. When flying it, it feels kind of like a dragonfly. It's super responsive, it's super controllable. The first time I flew it, I did a power loop through the McDonald's hoops, went all the way around 2 holes, and I didn't clip the light or anything. I feel very confident in flying it. It feels super like floaty and light. It doesn't have that weight that you have to kind of balance. Also, you have the 1404 motors, and it's like you're using them. You're kind of like midway through what they can do, and you feel kind of the revving of the motors a little bit more in that configuration. You can think of it like a motorcycle. You have a 600cc and a 1000cc. When you have a 600cc, it's fast, it's light, and you can really control it. Then you get a 1000, and yes, it's faster, but it also has that weight. It's not as nimble. You have to kind of consider the momentum that you have with it, and it's nice and relaxing kind of on the highway to have all that extra power and not have it screaming. There's different people that like different things. Do you want the fastest, most powerful, or do you want the light, maneuverable? And this one is built more like power and weight. You can feel the weight, but also the motors are not working as hard. So you have that nice kind of low end torque and the momentum. So if you like that feeling of being able to kind of throw your drone and catch it and fling it around stuff, this drone has that feeling, what people would say the 5-inch feel. I don't really know what a 5-inch flies like. I've flown one and it had a really weird tune, so I didn't know. I do have one of these guys that eventually I want to race with, but for the past 2 years, all I've experienced is the sub 250 experience. Let's go over to the table. I'll show you kind of what I was thinking when designing this, how it came to be. We've gone through a few iterations. I started off with kind of wanting to build a, this was going to be called the Psycho. It was interesting, but it had a lot of flaws to me. Firstly, I was thinking that I could build something that would be able to fit the DJI camera in there, the one from the original Air unit. I thought if I made these holes at the top and bottom, I'd be able to move around the camera and be able to get it in there super tight without having to build a tall stack. But there'd be weak spots here that could crack, and it might end up being weak here too. Also, this was going to be more for the smaller motor configuration that would be able to take the bigger ones. That ended up transferring over to this thing where, okay, this would be the big one. I figured that eventually this would end up being a 3S setup and this would be a 4S setup. And the whole idea would be that I could fly my 4Ss till they break and I smash up everything, and then I could reuse the broken batteries to make a 3S setup and continue on my journey into fun. As I was building this, it started getting the way that lots of the drones are, where they're just too big, too heavy, and I don't like that. One of the first drones that I flew that I was super excited about was this Armaton Tadpole. It looked really cool, it looked exciting, space grade and all this stuff, but right from the first time I flew it almost, it started cracking in the middle of the frame over here. There were little cracks, and it didn't last very long. I ended up getting another one, and the other one ended up disappearing, trying to do something really sketchy, and I'll never see it again. And the Armaton lifetime warranty doesn't cover drones that disappear into nothingness. The Petrel, this is actually not a Petrel anymore, but there was the Petrel, and Petrel, I don't know, I flew it, but everything on it was just basically garbage. And I really don't like ELRS. I think that they're the most garbage company in our hobby. Everything on the drone was busted. From the camera, it wasn't soldered on properly, the flight controller was dead, and the motors died super fast. So I was insanely unhappy with the Petrel. Also, it was built very tall. Like, this was super high up. So it's just like, I just find it so ugly when we have these high stacks that are wasting space. So I kind of redid the Petrel. Everything on this is new. I cut it, put holes in it, and just strapped it to the board better. I changed all the motors and made something a lot more tight. It has a 20 by 20 and a 16 by 16 in there. So I had to like print a plate, like an adapter, to be able to put the whoop board on. So that was one of the things that frustrated me with this, but surprisingly this frame is pretty strong. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Then from scouring the internet of all sub 250 videos, I found a guy that was flying the Tadpole really well, and then he switched over to this frame, the Patch Ray. And from the moment I saw this guy flying with it, you could just tell it was just something special. And I reached out to the designer and we became friends, and he's probably been one of my biggest FPV friends because I've been doing most of this just alone. I fell in love with this drone and I started buying them. I bought a pile of them. This is the last one that survived. I've at least killed at least 3 of these, and these frames lasted me the longest. I always bloody smashed the right arm off. And the thing that's also amazing with this drone is when you have the battery underneath and then you have the action cam on top, it creates this beautiful like balance, the balance of the weight on top and underneath. It's like a little like slingshot, like it's super flingable, and it has a weight to it. So I really love this drone. It's a solid drone. The big thing that was missing here for me was being able to do the top battery mount and being able to play with different configurations. Pavel is an excellent drone designer, but he's very set in his ways. He's very like, he believes, oh, this is the way. And every time I try and do like some other things like build cheaply or do something stupid, he just kind of frowns upon me. But that's okay. I really love that he's passionate, and just to find people in the hobby that are passionate is what is so great about it. It's also fun to watch like grown men arguing and bickering over everything like children in the kindergarten sandbox. I've tried, you know, everyone says this Synologue is like the greatest thing ever. I've had a terrible experience with this. So I have the Foxwhoop 25, which I'm going to be testing for Cinewhoop stuff. I was heavily influenced by Pavel and my favorite drone, the Patchray. I love supporting someone that's made something beautiful, but I want to make something beautiful too. And then I flew a Crux 35. And the first time I flew a Crux 35, put a Runcam Orange on it, and I had an accident. And in that accident, see what happened? The arms fell off on both sides. And what's crazy is the electronics survived, but the frame was gone. It's done. Then there was another time, and just hitting it into grass, it cracked right over here because they have these stupid holes. And I've seen this now in lots of frames where they put the holes and they don't have enough carbon around them, so they break. The Dodo from Adam RC, Sky Zone, I think, made this drone. This actually survived a super, super long time. What's interesting about that is, like, the Patchray is a much heavier frame than the Dodo. So this little light 3-inch frame lasted quite a while. It made me realize kind of like the difference between super light drones and heavier drones. A lighter drone, you'd figure might be weaker, but because it's lighter, in some ways it's harder to break. Because it takes a hit and there's not as much momentum. But I messed around with a Crux 35 and I basically built something like this. I designed a battery mount, I ordered some 15mm standoffs, and I took the Crux top plate and I shortened it and basically created something like this out of the Crux. And when I flew it, it flew insanely amazing. It's the best experience I had. And it was funny because I got used to flying the Patchray in digital. So that's another thing that was neat with Pavel's drone. This is analog, but if you put a larger canopy on it, fly it with Vista, it was awesome having a digital drone that's so little and light and fun. So I'd been flying this in digital all the time, but I also ended up breaking like 5 Vistas. Like I broke so many Vistas, and I'm poor because I spent all my money on FPV. And I run a hair salon and COVID has totally wrecked my business. I'm just dirt broke. That's just the truth. But this obsession has continued. So I'd been used to flying digital, but then I started flying analog again. I flew the Crux 35 because it's so cheap. For less than 200 bucks, you can get a Crux 35 and you can go fly it with the battery on top. I noticed right away, like, zero latency, like just the difference of flying digital and then flying just with analog. When I started flying analog, I felt like I was really missing something. I felt like I really wanted digital. But then when I went from digital back to analog, I just was like, it feels so good. I felt like it was so responsive, like I was doing things and I had confidence that I didn't have when I was flying the digital drone. So what ended up happening was I'd been stuck on this design, very unhappy with it. It wasn't really going anywhere, and I didn't know how to design a top plate either. So I just took one of these and I cut the arms off and made that my top plate. But it wasn't ready to be something that I could produce. I kept thinking about how the Crux 35 just flew so well. So I'm just like, if the Crux 35 flew so well, why don't I just take something that I know worked? Because these were not true X's either. And there's something about a true X that it's balanced, it's easier to tune, it flies amazing, and that the Patchray is an X, the Crux is an X, so why am I gonna go and build something that I don't really have as much experience with? Just because other, like, freestyle pilots like Mr. Steele and others are flying them. One night, I just said, forget all the other drones. I'm just gonna take the measurements off the Crux 35 and I'm gonna change it to my liking. So that night, I went on AutoCAD and I designed a drone, and it looked really interesting. It was a little, like, it was really, like, it was just based off circles. I see all these triangular designs and I figure that circles are strong because they absorb the impact, and it's not on a corner, it's circular. So I think that absorbs impacts well. But I don't know that. That's just like I guess, my intuition or my thoughts on things. So I wanted to build this really kind of like circular, round, and then these go past the motors. And I love how some of the 5 inches, the Vegas and other drones, Sync FPV, how they have these drones that have all these accessories and they look really cool. But then when we do our sub 250 things, all we have to fly are these little racers that don't have protection, that don't have all these accessories, that you can't like deck out, that you can't really change. So I said, I want to make something that does everything. I can build it as a freestyle, I can build it as a racer, I can build it as a Cinewhoop, and I'm going to keep coming up with different configurations for this frame, and I love it. So I made this, and it wasn't very round. It kind of reminded me of like a Star Wars like bad guy spaceship. And yeah, it was a little bit too kind of pointy everywhere. So I rounded everything out. And I got this, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, I couldn't do it. To me, it's way too ugly. Like it looks like a bloody flying potato. I just didn't want to be the person that designed the potato. I care a lot about the aesthetic. I want it to look good, I want it to perform well, but it's like I want to see it and be like, this is something pretty. So then I started bending the corners and stuff, and I ended up finally with this, and I said, this is pretty. This is beautiful. I like it. I've watched everyone looking at, for instance, Chris Rosser's frames. In his like V2s, like the 5 inch, I think it looks quite nice. But in lots of his mini drones, they look kind of too much like tanks. They look too heavy. I think that if you have a drone that you can tune all the resonance out of, but it weighs like 20, 30 grams or whatever more than it needs to, then you've kind of, to me, screwed yourself over. I haven't done any really strength testing or resonance testing out of any of these drones, but I can tell you that it feels really good. And I have to fly it a lot more. This is what I'm planning to fly basically all the time. And yes, there's no replaceable arms. I thought about building it with replaceable arms, but the thing is that when you have these replaceable arms and like, I just keep thinking of Chris Rosser's 3.5, there's 8 standoffs. Like, there's 8 standoffs. There's that extra like camera plate, protection plates. I don't like those camera protection plates either. I just like the idea of it being as tight as possible. So yes, there's gonna be props in view. And yes, if you break this frame, you're just gonna have to replace it. But because it's so small, it's cheaper. You can buy a pile of these frames and you'll be able to kind of swap it out pretty quickly. It's simple. Because it doesn't have replaceable arms, that makes it lighter. The arms are nice and thick, so it is strong, and you can just kind of go to town on it and just have a ton of them and know that you're going to be able to have so much fun with it. You're going to be able to try toilet tanked on top, underneath. You're going to be able to build racers. You're going to be able to kind of just do anything that you want with it. It will be better built with 1404s just because the motors will line up with the frame. It does annoy me that when you put the larger motors that it doesn't line up with the frame, like they stick out, so I don't really like that. I might end up doing an iteration where it's not like this, but it flies well, it does what it needs to do, and I really do like the way that this motor mounting is. The problem with putting these motors in the same hole is you lose a lot of strength, but by having this hole formation, it keeps the arm nice and strong. Also, the biggest part is here in the front where it's going to bump. And when it bumps, that's going to protect all your insides. I don't really like the spikes coming out of them either, so this is very rounded. I'm going to design bumpers for this. I'm going to design skids for it. I'm going to design all sorts of different canopies. And if you want to, I'd love for you to do that as well and test out all sorts of different configurations. This is just going to be a super fun drone that's simple and can do everything. You can fly these with a 900 mAh battery and a naked GoPro and stay under the 250 gram limit. So I think that the future of drones is going to be sub 250. When flying these, the performance that you get and the joy that you get out of flying To me, I don't feel like I'm missing anything. I absolutely love them. And I didn't design these to make money. I didn't design them to just throw electronics in them. I designed them specifically for me and what I want, but I thought about as many different possibilities as I could for you as well. I'm so happy to be able to share this with you, and there's going to be many more like modifications and updates to this. It's something that is a love project. If you'd like to help support me, I have a Patreon and you can join it for as little as $1, and all the money that comes to me for Patreon, none of it will be used for it will be used for personal pleasure, but it'll all be used for, you know, building drones, designing drones. It'll basically help me pay for stuff like this. I'm not gonna take it and go on vacation or anything, I promise. Thank you so much for your time, and please, you know, order the frame, test it out, tag me in it, tell me about it. I wanna hear your experiences. I think you guys are really gonna love this.